Welcome back to the My First Rodeo podcast, the show that asks very cool, famous, interesting people about the various firsts on their paths to success. Today is no exception. We'll be talking with Marc, Pollina, who is a marathon runner, but not just a runner. He is the author of the newly released The Boston Marathon Handbook. And as we get ready for the Boston Marathon next month, I thought it'd be a really good time to talk to him about the pageantry, the experience, the history of really the most famous, I would say one of the most famous, certainly the most famous American marathon. Some would say the most famous marathon. Been running it since 1897. Since 1897. So that's quite a long time. And he's got an interesting story, interesting backstory that we get into a little bit about his background in both English literature and also studying at MIT in more of the digital transformation and technology side of things. So, I mean, even as a student, certainly using multiple, both sides of his brain, as we say, and had some experiences in his life that led him from baseball to running, and then really becoming a student of the Boston Marathon. In fact, most of the marathons that he's run to date, and this will be his 19th coming up, have been at Boston, although he's certainly run others. He and I were introduced by Jack Fultz, who you will remember from episode 27. Jack Fultz is the 1976 winner of the Boston Marathon, the so-called Run for the Hoses, the hottest Boston Marathon on record. It was over 100 degrees. And Jack was kind enough to introduce me to Marc and suggested he might be a good guest for this show. And I think you'll agree that he is, and he was, and we have a good discussion. So we'll get to that in just a few minutes. First, I usually like to start the show with something good, provocative, and interesting. And what I wanted to share, and it's really apropos of the conversation that Marc and I have, is a really good book that I'm reading called A More Beautiful Question. More Beautiful Question. And the subtitle is The Power of Inquiry to Spark Breakthrough Ideas. It's written by a guy named Warren Burger, not the Supreme Court Justice, I don't believe, because it's a new book, and Warren Burger's been dead for a while. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say a different Warren Burger. But what's fascinating about the book on so many different levels, and Marc, Pollina, and I talk a little bit about asking questions during my interview of him. But it struck me, and I think it's why the book was attractive to me, that the way we educate in this country, formally and informally, is so much through memorization. And it's such a historic relic in so many ways. Not that there aren't things that need to be memorized, but obviously our education system and our method of memorization dates back to, well, certainly before we had books, and in current times before we had computers and now artificial intelligence. And my point is, the answers are there. Certainly we need to have some basic knowledge to formulate questions, to have conversations, to be a good citizen. You need to know some certain basic things. But I suggest that there's much more that we have memorized and that are causing our children to memorize than what actually we need to know or accumulate in our brain and in our memories, which have limited capacities to some degree. And what's more important, and what we don't spend a lot of time doing, is teaching the best method to ask questions. How does one ask a beautiful question, a useful question? Because when you're creating something, whether it's through one of the artificial intelligence platforms, through a Google search, or through a conversation with another human being, we elicit information with questions. And yet we kind of wing it when it comes to what's the best way to ask a question. And communication is so critical in that respect, both in terms of how to get the best answer out of Chat GPT, another human being, Google, a book, wherever we're looking for information. And I would suggest it also enables us to better empathize, because the better questions we ask of other human beings, the more reliable and useful and unguarded and vulnerable answer we'll get, and the more connection we'll have with that person, which is so desperately needed in this time of divisiveness and silos and separation. So I commend this book to you, A More Beautiful Question, The Power of Inquiry to Spark Breakthrough Ideas by Warren Berger. And I hope that this interview with Marc Pollina, the author of the Boston Marathon Handbook, reflects a beautiful question or two. It certainly reflects some beautiful answers. This is me talking to Marc Pollina. All right. Well, Marc Pollina, welcome to the My First Rodeo podcast.
Mike, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, so exciting for a variety of reasons, including your book is so timely, not just in general with the Boston Marathon coming online in just a few weeks, but me running my first Boston Marathon. So I'm excited. This is a very selfish episode for me, and I hope for everybody else that gets to listen and get inspired by not just the specifics of the Boston Marathon, but a lot of metaphors, a lot of just life lessons that I know you've learned in all the Boston Marathons that you've run and just being around that scene.
Absolutely. I it's going to be my 19th coming up, but I really envy you because I'll never forget my first back in 2003. It's just a special thing. And then the funny thing is, even though I've been running it year after year, it's different every time because what you bring to the race is very different. The stage of your life that you're in, whether you're in a good headspace, a bad headspace, maybe you lost your job. There's all kinds of things that you take to Hopkinton with you. And more importantly, the race itself is different every year. And we can talk about why, the weather being front and center.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do want to go back to your first and some other firsts in your life, but you made me think of one thing which I've been experiencing this year as I've trained and done a few other runs, including my the 24-hour run that brought our mutual friend Jack Foltz and I together. But my father passed in August, and I feel like he and I have been having some discussions along the way, and whatever demons you're exercising, whatever inspiration you need. Sometimes it's baggage you bring, sometimes it's catharsis. But just talk about that experience, both for runners who can sort of empathize and understand what you're saying, and for non-runners who might not understand that dynamic.
Yeah, it's interesting. Running for me is very cathartic, and it's something that when you first start doing it, a lot of people stop because the running event itself, actually the physical act of running, is not very enjoyable. I describe it as, when I first started, I would run, but I didn't enjoy the run. I'd enjoy the feeling after the run. Mm-hmm. And that was magical because you just felt empowered, but the run itself was dreadful.
I often say I don't like to run. I like to have run, but
correct.
But that changes, doesn't it?
It does. So it changes in a funny way that you don't see coming, because when you first start running, you can't run very far. But as you keep running, you get to the point where you get to maybe 5 or 6 miles each run. And it's then that you hit this, magical runner's high, that all of a sudden you feel like you're just on autopilot. And your brain can go in different directions. You're not even really thinking about the act of running anymore. You're just going through things in your life, whether it's the death of a loved one or something at work or whatever it may be, your aspirations of any sort. And you can just tune out the world for that 45 minutes or an hour that you're running. And you hit that runner's high, which is that's a whole nother level. And, sadly, many runners or athletes that begin to run never get to that point. And I think you may know, after running, you said 24 hours, that there's some magic in there somewhere.
There's definitely, each experience is unique. And certainly when you get into ultras and 24 hours and 100-mile runs, there's something different that happens. It's more about surviving. At least at my level, I'm not trying to win those races. I'm just trying to not die. And there's just this mind over matter thing that happens that you just sort of figure out what's going on. Maybe it's a horrible blister that you get that you're going to have to run another 75 miles with. Maybe it's a cramp. Maybe, it's just finding ways to manage yourself and your mind and just not quitting.
Yeah. Yeah, I always describe, I have not gone beyond a marathon, but I always describe a marathon as being like this really intense, crucible, microcosm of life, right? Because you're going through all these emotions and things and maladies and throughout your journey to the finish line. And like you said, you have to triage, you have to figure these things out on the fly as you're going. And it's very much like life, right? I always say in a marathon, and you can probably relate to this in an ultra, never make a decision when you're feeling bad. Right. Because you're going to feel bad a lot, but never make a decision when you're feeling bad. So you need to come out of that on the other side and then make a decision. Kind of shelve it for a sec, put it on a shelf. So yeah, I think in the journey, right? So you begin this fresh, person in Hopkinton, and you work your way to Boston through all these different towns. Each of them has a different personality, and you're going through all kinds of things along the way. And it's, wow. I mean, it really is like life, personified in a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hour time frame, depending on how fast you are.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in life or in parenting or anybody that you might mentor or just experiences that you face in marriage or what have you, that you can't draw on some experience that you've had in, frankly, an individual marathon. And then for someone like you that's done so many of them, I remember when I was running this Boston or when I was running in Chicago and, I took this turn and this happened, and you draw on that for a given life experience.
Yeah. I look at, this book that I wrote about the Boston Marathon Handbook, it's kind of like this, I'm Italian, as you know, but it's kind of like this interesting mashup of 2 Japanese philosophies. So there's Ikigai, right? So, the sense of purpose in your life where, if you've seen the Blue Zones or read the Blue Zones, you understand that having a sense of purpose in life increases your longevity, right? And writing for me has always been that thing. I had been in financial services. I had done all kinds of different things. I never had that feeling that I have when I write. And then the second philosophy or worldview, if you will, is wabi-sabi, which is perfection in the imperfection. And that's running for me because it's very rare for a race or a training run to ever be perfect. So, but there's beauty. There's absolute beauty in the imperfection. Mm-hmm. So if you take the Ikigai and you take the, the wabi-sabi and you combine them, that's kind of describes this book about the Boston Marathon. And, I think there's a lot of life lessons in there.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. And the book's extraordinary. Obviously there's other books written about the marathon. There's books, a lot of publications that came out around the 100th anniversary. But yours is sort of a different approach in the things that you've already said in this interview, but also you've just been around it so much and you know so much about the nuance and the fun things and you write about it from a spectator's standpoint as well. Talk about some of the hidden gems, things that maybe folks that know there is a Boston Marathon but have never been there. Or have been there but haven't fully appreciated some of these little quirks and neat things. Tell us about some of those.
Sure. First, I'll say that the book itself, to differentiate it, so to speak, from other Boston Marathon books, typically those books fall into 2 buckets. The first being a memoir. So I think of Choosing to Run by Des Linden, which is a fantastic book, and she has had an incredible life, and it certainly walks through her race in 2018, which was, insane. And then that's written typically, obviously, from a first-person point of view. I did this, I did that. And then you have these historical accounts, and there are many of them too, because the Boston Marathon has such rich history. And they're written, obviously, from a third-person point of view, right? Bill Rogers did this in 1975, and Johnny Kelly did this in 1928. So when I was looking to write a book on the Boston Marathon, I wanted to figure out a new way to do it. And like you said, not just talk about the history, not in any way, shape, or form talk about my experience. It would have been natural for me to talk about my experience, but I wanted to stay away from that. I wanted to put the reader front and center so that literally when they're reading the book, that they will feel like they're running the race. They'll feel like they're preparing for the marathon. So I wrote the entire book in second person, as if, it's literally as you're going through Wellesley, to Newton, and then on your way to Brookline and Boston, you really do feel like you're traversing the course yourself. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is there are a lot of quirky things about the Boston Marathon. We mentioned the weather. We could get deeper into that, but I wanted to have some fun with the book, right? I wanted to be very whimsical, playful, but in a very reverent way, because there's nobody on this planet who loves the Boston Marathon more than I do, and I really wanted to honor the race and be true to that. But there are some funny elements. So I put in the 10 commandments of Boston Marathon etiquette. I thought was important. I put in 7 cardinal sins of social media for runners.
Okay.
Because there are some sins.
Yeah.
10 taper do's, 10 taper don'ts. I have a Hall of Fame. I've got a runner's wipeout checklist. I have rules for banditing. Don't do it, but there are rules if you do. I have a head to toe gear guide. I have a pre-race report card. So there's all these fun elements that wherever you open the book, it's engaging on the page.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those 10 commandments, because I have a penchant. I'm a pretty honorable person. I have a lot of integrity, but I tend to break rules inadvertently. When I play golf, I always tell people, because I'm not a great golfer, if I make a mistake or I do something, I'm not trying to cheat. I simply don't know, the rules or the nuances of the rules. So I'm a good candidate for your 10 commandments. What are some of the ones that I am, as a novice and a inadvertent rule breaker, am most likely to fall prey to?
I think, one that keeps coming out is commandment number 6. And let me just read what that is. Thou shalt not covet thy fellow runner's wave, bib number, PR, BQ, gear, mileage, medals, calves, or anything else. And really what I mean by that is, you have this comparison trap that you fall into when you're at Boston. If you're running a sleepy race in, say, Hartford, Connecticut, and there are 500 runners in the race, you can kind of just zone out and do your thing. Mm-hmm. At Boston, you can't really do that. You've got 30,000 people with you, runners with you. You've got 500,000 fans. And not only that, but you are in a corral in Hopkinton with all these runners, if you've qualified, that have qualifying times similar to what yours is. So it's very natural to look around you and think to yourself, those shoes, those super shoes are the latest. They're probably faster than mine. Mm-hmm. Wow, that runner looks really, really fast.
Right.
Why even belong in this corral? Mm-hmm. And then as you run, even getting out of Hopkinton, you can compare as well. You'll perhaps be in Framingham and you're just doing your thing, and then you'll see 2 or 3 runners pass you, and you'll question, should I go with them? Should I run with them? I feel pretty good, so I should just run their pace for now. And you really keep having these temptations that you don't get at some smaller races, and you need to avoid them. So don't covet all these things that I just described in commandment number 6, because it really is a trap.
I like that one. So that one is sort of an inward looking commandment. What's one, if there is one, that's more outward looking, where I'm likely to annoy or offend someone else by a covenant violation?
Yeah, that's a really good one.
'Cause I hate to annoy people, at least when I'm not trying to. As a stand-up comedian, I sometimes annoy them by design. But, in a race day, I don't want to be the thing that distracts someone else.
This is a controversial one, but I got to throw it out there.
Okay.
And that is commandment number 4.
Okay.
Thou shalt not wear thy swag or merch before crossing the finish line.
Oh, yeah.
Now, let me just say this. You've got 2 camps here, right? One camp says, I'll wear the merch and the swag whenever I want to wear it.
All right, I paid for it.
You have the other camp, which I'm kind of, in and that is, you really don't want to, and I make an analogy in the book. It would be, I played a lot of baseball before I got into running. So, if you were in the dugout in the ninth inning and your pitcher had a no-hitter, and you looked over at him and you said, "Hey, do you realize you have a no-hitter?"
Mm-hmm.
That is just the most verboten thing you could do in baseball. It's just an unwritten rule. You don't talk to your pitcher pretty much after the fourth or fifth inning if it's a no-hitter. You don't. You keep them alone. So there are things in running that are infractions of the same sort, etiquette-wise, that are unwritten, and that is one of them. And that is, wearing the race, the freebie shirt that they give you at the expo during the race or before the race, or wearing your celebration jacket in advance of the race.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you on that one without even knowing that as a covenant. I do have a follow-up question though, and that is, I'm on the Dana-Farber team, and they sent me they call it a singlet, but it's just a tank shirt. Again, my usual inclination would be not to wear a shirt, but I think that one we're supposed to wear it as part of sort of identification.
Yes, that's a different animal.
Okay,
that is technically your kit, part of your kit for the race.
Okay, so
you need to certainly wear your singlet for the race. What I'm talking about is the free stuff that you get at the expo.
Yeah.
Or that you purchase perhaps through Adidas or some other. That's something you don't want to wear because you're really just tempting fate in doing so.
Right. No, that makes sense. So what about from the spectator standpoint? I mean, obviously, many more people, as you said, 500,000 people are going to be spectators on average, only 30,000 or so racing. So a lot more people that are listening to this podcast or that are maybe even reading your book are going to be spectators. What's the best way for a spectator to truly experience things, whether they're cheering somebody on or just cheering everybody on?
Yeah, great question. Spectating at Boston is a very big deal. Having run many other larger races, and I say it's a big deal because the crowds at Boston are so knowledgeable, and they've been there. If they haven't been there themselves, their families have been there. There's a real intimacy that runners and spectators share that you don't see at other marathons. I mean, I've been at some marathons, and I'm not going to pick on New York because I had an incredible experience at the New York City Marathon. But you get a different vibe, right? They're cheering and they're loud, but it's not like they're as knowledgeable as somebody who maybe grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, and their families had been cheering for literally decades, or maybe their uncle ran the race. And it's just this intimacy you don't get at some of these larger marathons. So if you're spectating, another thing I would say is kind of pick your point, because each town, Hopkinton, Ashland, Framingham, Wellesley, Natick, et cetera, they all have a different personality. And you kind of want to pick your spot of where to go. It is possible, because it is point to point, to spectate early in the race and then either drive or take some type of commuter rail into the city and see the finish. So some people like to do that. There's some great spots, of course, like around Wellesley with the Scream Tunnel. Boston College is massive and a big party atmosphere there. When the Red Sox game spills out into Kenmore Square, that whole Kenmore Square area, which is a mile to go, or mile 25, is a fantastic place. And then the corner of when you take the two most famous turns of road racing, the right on Hereford and the left on Boylston, right there near the Pines Convention Center is a perfect place to see the runners turn and see the finish line for the first time, which is pretty magical. So
just
really
depends what you want. Yeah, it's what you're looking for. Talk about, and you alluded to it a little in your answer, the role of the colleges, and in particular the female college students, who I understand play a big part in some of the traditions.
Yeah, so in Wellesley College, and this started actually the first year of the race, 1897. There were some Wellesley College students who were cheering for a Harvard gentleman. And that started a tradition that goes on to this day. And the most amazing thing about it is it seemed to have just grown year after year. So when you are approaching Wellesley and you're at mile, say, 11 and a half, you've just left Natick. things start to get a little quiet, but you'll hear this incredible roar in the distance. So you're going to hear it in advance of actually seeing it. And as you get closer to it, you'll just get louder and louder, right? It's so amazing. And then depending on what you want to do, whether you want to PR and run really fast, or you just you're running for the pure joy of running and not really concerned about your time, you're either going to want to veer towards the crazy mayhem, because these girls have signs like, kiss me, I'm a freshman, or, whatever it may be. And there are many runners that stop to kiss the Wellesley girls. It's the thing. But that's not going to help you PR or BQ. So
you might. I mean, you never know if it inspires you, or it could be a really good kiss.
I never thought of it that way. I mean, I guess if you were to slow down just for a few hot seconds, you then might have that be energized to run faster. It is tricky though, because you really do need to be careful about that stretch, and it is a good half mile where you're running through this noise, because you will feel like your legs are turning over faster, and you need to kind of catch yourself and say, usually during the entire race, you're thinking, I need to keep my cadence going. And for that half mile stretch, you need to do the exact opposite. And you need to say, whoa,
back down.
I don't want to burn through, energy that I could absolutely need in the Newton Hills.
And what mile about is that?
So that's mile 12 and a half. And you're going to hear that wall of sound, the scream tunnel, just before you get to the halfway point, which is in Wellesley Town Center. That's 13.1.
Yeah, and am I right that some men in particular stopped to do some push-ups at that point to impress the co-eds?
You're going to see a little bit of everything, including men doing push-ups or whatever it takes to get there. But you know what? The girls are fantastic, and it's become an event for the school where the entire community of girls, they get together, they create the signs, and it really is this because we didn't talk about this yet, but Boston Marathon is on a Monday, and it's a holiday, so it's Patriots Day. So it's not a Saturday race, it's not a Sunday race. It is indeed Patriots Day, which is a holiday. So the entire city, including Wellesley College, just has this incredible party atmosphere that is special to the race.
Yeah, I do wonder if that's going to stand the test of time. Like 20 years from now, is there going to be a picture of me stopping to kiss a freshman girl? And then people are going to be like, what a creep. Can you believe what this guy did in 2024?
People are concerned about that. I have some photos in the book, and the gentleman that gave them to me was concerned of them actually being. And there's nothing. Listen, it's very playful and fun. It's not. There is a decorum,
right?
And the reason it has persisted year after year and strengthened is because of honoring that decorum.
Yeah. And a kiss me sign, I think, is express consent. So I think legally you're probably okay.
You're the attorney.
Yeah. I would say that would probably hold up, at least in 2024. Who knows? The rules could change. But I want to talk a little bit about some of your first rodeos. So you mentioned your first was 2003 for Boston. Talk about that experience and what brought you to it and what you got out of it.
Sure. Yeah. So as I said, I played college baseball, so I'm not a natural runner. People look at me now and they say, well, you're just a natural runner. And if you looked at me in 2001 and 2002, you certainly wouldn't have said that, because I was, lifting. I had, again, played baseball my entire life. I grew up with a pitching machine and a batting cage in my backyard. I wanted to go pro. And when that dream died, I really was, it's just in my DNA to train very intensely for something. And I didn't have that something anymore. Baseball was gone. So I started lifting. And then what ended up happening is I moved to the Boston area in 2000. And
I'm sorry, where were you living before that?
I was in Tampa, Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was I had no idea that where I lived when I moved to Boston was literally blocks away from Heartbreak Hill. So I was in the Newton area, pretty close to the base of Heartbreak Hill. And I watched the race in 2001, and the elites just floated up the hill at sub 5-minute clip. And I was just mesmerized. So it was at that time that I said, you know what, I'm going to lace up my shoes and I'm going to start running. So I literally the next day ran a quarter mile, huffing and puffing. And in 2003, I decided that I would run the Boston Marathon for the first time. And I did it as a bandit, which is, again, very much frowned upon, would not suggest anybody do it.
And tell our listeners that may not know what a bandit is.
Yeah, so a bandit just means that you're running the race, but you don't have an official bib and you didn't pay for that bib. You didn't qualify and you didn't raise money for a charity. So basically, you're not a very good person if you're a bandit. However, the culture of the Boston Marathon, I hate to say it was really built on banditing. I make the analogy in the book that banditing is like the seed that grew these concentric layers of the mighty oak of the Boston Marathon. Because
it was a little elite in the beginning, huh?
Say it again?
It was a little elite in the beginning. It was not a regular person's run.
Right. The BAA actually said in its mission that it is not a jogging race back in the day. So yeah, it was a thing where if you couldn't get in or you just wanted to run it without paying, then you would band it. And that's what I did in 2003. And a lot of, people you think that perhaps wouldn't have banded it did. For instance, Dave McGilvery, who was the race director and has run 51 Boston Marathons, began his journey with a bandit finish in his first year. So, it's not something that I would suggest that anybody do. It's just it's kind of changed. The culture has changed. As cool as it was, and you might have been, the coolest person at a cocktail party if you had banded at Boston back in 1991, is not so cool anymore. And things really shifted in 2013 with the bombing.
Yeah.
When backpacks and people in costumes and everything that was being done, people who didn't belong in the race, was being scrutinized. And it just was this cultural inflection point, really a cultural shift in the perception of banditing and the BAA has looked at things quite differently in the last decade.
And so it's policed more so now. I mean, is it harder to bandit if one wanted to?
It is. I mean, it's very difficult to get into a corral in Hopkinton, whereas back in 2003 when I did it, it was a lot easier. Now they have quite a few volunteers and officials that will not let you into those corrals. That said, I will say, and this has always been the case, if you do bandit, and again, don't do it, but if you did, you will receive medical attention on the course. You will get water. But you need to be really mindful of the people who have paid.
Yeah. And
if there's one outstretched arm of volunteer with a glass of Gatorade, and you're going to reach for it, and you're a bandit, don't do it.
Yeah.
It's just not right.
Bad form. Yeah. So with that caveat, 2003 was your first. Tell us about that experience. What do you remember from it?
Yeah, I remember it was very painful. I was early stages of training and running, so I had this thing called IT band syndrome. Every runner that's run for decades like I have typically has gone through a lot of overuse injuries. In this particular case, I had IT band syndrome, which is this band that runs the length of your leg, and it causes very sharp pain. So I was in a lot of pain, and I finished in 4 hours and 29 minutes, which is for me very slow. But I will say this: when I finished, I felt transformed, absolutely transformed. I knew, most people say, oh, you have to forget the pain of your first marathon before you make a decision on whether you want to run another one. I knew the moment that I crossed that finish line that I was going to do it again. and I was going to do it as an official runner. So it really changed my life in a lot of ways, that race and that day.
Yeah. So do you come back and run 2004 as an official runner?
I did. So in 2004, I ran with Mass General Hospital, fighting kids' cancer one step at a time. It's raising money for children's cancer, and it's an incredible team that was put together in 1998 and has grown over the years we went from 10 runners to well over 100 now. And they raise millions of dollars each year for, the pediatric oncology unit.
That's outstanding. So, what was the difference for you from a running experience, other than being official in 2004, in terms of your experience in the run and how you performed?
Yeah, great question. Because, one of the reasons I wrote the book is I have so many different perspectives on the race. I've run as a bandit, I've run as a charity runner, and I've run as a qualified runner. So I've seen it from multiple angles. Charity running is amazing. I had the most amazing experience, not only in 2004 with MGH, but also with a team later called Project Hope, which is a women's shelter in Dorchester. And I was just amazed at the camaraderie. You'd think that it would only exist among the qualified runners, but that's very, very wrong. So in 2004, running with Mass General, I got in the habit of every Thursday meeting up with charity runners, and we would meet at this bar in Boston called Crossroads, and we would take the T, which people that aren't from Boston don't know, it's the subway. So we take the T out to mile 17 on the course, and then we would run back the 9 miles back into town, and we would have pizza and beer at the finish and just kind of chill and get to know one another. And hundreds of runners would do this. It was like this cult. And it felt really special, like we were doing something special in the moment. And then looking back, it really just is something that has been a tradition. And it established so much connection between not just charity runners on your own team, like you're running for Dana-Farber, but charity runners from the Liver Foundation and Mass General Hospital and, smaller like Boston Buddies and different organizations. And you became part of this almost fraternity. And it's something that is, again, very unique, I think, to the Boston Marathon and that feeling that you have when you're standing in Hopkinton.
Yeah, that's really special. And obviously something being in Florida and training, I'm not getting to experience that camaraderie, but they do a good job of reaching out and making sure I'm doing what I need to do. So I do look forward to getting into town and having 4 days to at least have some of that cult experience.
It feels like a cult sometimes.
So I want to talk a little bit about your background and even first rodeos pre-running. What sort of, at least, is your backstory that brought you to all this? A couple of things interested me. One, you and I both have backgrounds in English, although I'm sure you at a much higher level, English literature, and of course you've gone on to be a writer. I was an English major. That's my background. But then I see that you went on to MIT and got a degree in digital transformation, which I don't know what it is. So I'm going to ask you that. And also how one transfers from English literature to digital transformation, seemingly a lot more technologically oriented than, say, English literature.
Okay. First things first. Yes, English is my thing for sure.
Guilty as charged.
So my father is a mechanical engineer, and it was clear early on in my life that I was not destined to become a mechanical engineer. But the funny thing is, when I graduated from college with a degree in English, I got into financial services. So I worked for decades in financial services. And it wasn't until later that I went to MIT, and I didn't get a degree. I actually just took many classes in digital transformation specific to some work that I was doing.
I see. Okay.
But my true passion, without a doubt, getting back to my ikigai comment earlier, is writing. Writing has been that thing for me, especially when I was in financial services. I was writing screenplays and TV pilots. And it was like an escape for me, right? I felt like I was using both sides of my brain.
Right.
I needed one for the writing, and I needed a very different one for financial services.
Sure.
But I always felt I was at my best when I was doing both. If you removed one or the other, I felt like I was a little out of balance.
Yeah.
And then you throw running in there with it, and it was like this perfect trifecta for me.
All right. So maybe you and I aren't that different. I'm obviously a lawyer by day and a business lawyer at that, a comedian by night, and now sort of developed this hobby / philanthropy of running and ultra marathons and so forth. So maybe you and I are more birds of a feather than I thought.
We are kindred spirits for sure. It sounds like.
Indeed. Although, whereas I don't hate practicing law, I'm going to go out on a limb because your biography says that you recovered your soul from the cold grip of the financial services industry, and say that you probably were not a big fan of doing that many hours during the day.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm not going to say anything bad about my experience. I absolutely learned a lot, but it was a thing that joy was not front and center. And I felt, like I said, having that sense of purpose. It's not like I woke up in the morning supercharged to put together trading schedules for Section 16 officers.
Which is interesting. I mean, everybody knows that section, of course. I have no idea.
I mean, it sounds really exciting.
It does. It does. You make it sound good.
Yeah, so it for me was it was I needed the writing almost to keep my sanity when I was doing it. And there were times where I was so busy with financial services that my writing went dormant, so to speak, for a while. But when it came back, it was just always nice to have it to when I started running too, to be out on a run, just enjoying it, and then have my brain free to think about plot points or think about something that I'm writing, and just get away from financial services in a way that I needed to do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a firm believer that, well, and I want to ask you about passions, but that, we all have passions, and sometimes we suppress our passions to go pursue our job on the assembly line, whatever that assembly line might be. That's not usually a good answer. That leads to all kinds of bad things and side effects and sadness and substance abuse, and at the very least, not living to your fullest. And then there's people that do nothing but their passions, and sometimes it's great, and oftentimes they don't pay bills, or they have difficulty with the means to that end. And then there's people like I try to be, it sounds like you may be, they're in the middle. Your highest and best use may be earning some money doing something like practicing law or working in the financial services sector for a season or for your entire life. But that platform, financially and sphere of influence wise and otherwise, puts you in a position to pursue these passions in a meaningful way and support others that are doing so.
Yeah, I found as a writer, it was always frustrating it was cathartic to write, but it was always frustrating to write something and have it just be on my laptop. Right. So having this book, the Boston Marathon Handbook, out in the world is just a whole nother level of fulfillment, where, it's not about Marc. It's about this great race. And it's just nice to have that vehicle to go out to meet other people, runners and readers, and talk about the race. So, it was so frustrating to have so many, projects, if you will, on making use of the creative part of my brain. And then finally had the breakthrough to not only have one book out, but then, work on another book, and maybe sell this backlog of screenplays. And so it's going to get more interesting. But But the dream, of course, would be to do nothing but that.
Sure.
But that is something that isn't easy to do.
No. And I mean, you've written a great, useful book that I think is going to be meaningful to everyone who's running and everyone who appreciates the history and pageantry of the Boston Marathon. But yeah, book writing and publishing isn't necessarily a path to financial success all by itself. So I applaud you for doing it and doing something very meaningful with your combination of passions.
Yeah, I'd like to think that it would be this massive success, and success is defined by how many books are sold. But the reality is, my hope is that whatever I do with this book and beyond this book is more of a legacy where I'm going to be dead. Meb and all the different, luminaries and dignitaries of the Boston Marathon that I talk about and that contributed to the book, we're all going to be dead, but the book is going to live on. And somebody's going to pick it up, decades from now and be able to glean some wisdom from it. And that's something that I hope, is my legacy versus, just struggling as a writer, and not having that chance to share, like I said, those projects that are on your laptop that you want to get out. So it's always this struggle to get to this point. And now the question is, what does it become once you have something out in the world?
Sure. And
I'm kind of feeling my way now, because I don't have all the answers, but it's pretty exciting to kind of have that machete in my hand and go down that path.
Yeah, and I'm impressed with the way you're navigating it. It's a lot like running a marathon, isn't it?
Absolutely. Marathon, you can stand on Hopkinton and be perfectly trained and, think that your race is going to go great, but you never truly know what you're going to get as the race unfolds.
Yeah.
You don't. A great example is, I was running one year. It was my breakthrough race. It was my first race that I ran a sub-3, and my stomach was completely jacked up, if you will, for about 10 miles between miles 3 and 13. And I thought, there is no way this is going to happen today. And I, in my brain, had said, this is the day I'm going to go sub-3. I'm ready for it. But sure enough, getting back to my earlier comment, never make a decision when you're feeling bad. So I gutted it out.
Literally.
Literally gutted it out. Thank you. And, I was able to come out the other side of that and pull myself.
Hopefully not literally on that one.
Yeah. Thank you. I love the comedian in you. That is, I pulled myself together and ran the sub-3. But again, you just never know until the race unfolds. And as it does, like you said earlier, you need to make those micro decisions and triage every step along the way. Yeah,
that stomach's a tough one because I find I have to get up really early and thoroughly process whatever happened the night before, let's say. And even then, you're like, well, do I need to eat something again? If I eat something again, what's going to happen to my stomach? And that's always a bit of internal gamesmanship, isn't it?
It is. And it's especially at Boston. It's one thing on a flat course when you hit mile 20 where your glycogen stores are depleted and you have, 6 more miles of flat terrain to traverse. But at Boston, there's a double whammy, right? So your glycogen stores typically run out around mile 20 or within 2 hours of running for somebody who's perhaps not as fast. So you need to constantly be, adding glycogen and electrolytes and sodium things to your system. And your stomach, sometimes does not handle it very well. But you need to keep giving it more, even though you perhaps are a little nauseous in the process. So it is indeed very, very tricky, tough to figure out, a lot of trial and error in that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you about something you may have just written it partially tongue in cheek on online presence, but it intrigued me because questions are something that's important to me for a variety of reasons. But you said asking, not telling, is selling is, I guess, something that you learned when you were a salesperson. And you say it in the context of somebody asked you a question about your book. But I wanted to get you to expound on that a little bit because it was fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So the blog that I wrote about that, somebody at an expo had literally said to me, tell me in 2 sentences why I should own your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, that is fantastic. I really like that. And again,
it was not your mom, right? Because my mom would definitely do that.
I mean, I had been in sales for decades, and I didn't have the perfect arrow in my quiver to answer that. And I did answer it with 2 sentences that I thought were decent. And then it dawned on me after the fact that what I should have done is I should have asked 2 questions rather than make 2 statements. Because when you're asking somebody a question, it's and they answer it, well, then it's true. However, if I tell you something, it's doubtful. So yeah, that was a moment, but I learned that long ago, and it's something to always kind of remind yourself of, that asking questions and listening is actually a far better skill than having the perfect answer.
Yeah. Do you remember what you were thinking on reflection would have been the good question to ask that person?
So yeah, he again said 2 sentences, and my response was something of the sort of, here I am at the expo. This book came out 20 days ago, and I will sign it and personalize it for you today. And, one day you'll feel, after running perhaps many Bostons, that you'll really understand the significance of what you have in your hands.
Mm-hmm. That's
kind of what
Not bad. A few semicolons in there, I think.
Yeah, I make use of a few for sure. So then what I would have said, I would have asked him, if this book helps you, because he had told me that he was hoping to qualify for Boston one day. I said, if this book helps you qualify for Boston, would you feel good about your decision to own it today?
That's a good one.
That would be the question I would ask. And there's no way he could have answered that without saying something effective, I'd feel great. Or,
sure.
So my second question would be, well, how would you like me to sign your book?
Yeah, that's good.
Right. So that's 2 sentences.
Yeah.
There are two questions.
Sure.
But it got exactly to where we should have been, which is me handing you a book that was signed. And what ended up happening is, with my 2-sentence answer they weren't questions, is he and his mother, who was there with him, walked away, and he said, I'll think about it. And he walked away. And the sad thing about that is this: if you have something that's valuable and there's a transaction that's made, then both sides win, right? The person that created that valuable thing and the person that's going to benefit from that valuable thing.
Sure.
So it wasn't the boy's fault, the runner's fault, that he walked away without the book. It was my fault. And I felt bad about that. So if he had walked away, he could have been reading it, and perhaps he'd be working right now on qualifying for Boston, and everybody would be happy.
Yeah.
So I learned from that moment.
Yeah, and I did too. I appreciated that. Missed opportunities. And certainly you've missed no opportunities in running Boston. As we close, what are you most looking forward to as you get ready for your next Boston Marathon?
Wow. So I'm at the stage now where, going up on my 19th Boston, my 27th marathon, and it's, it never gets easier to train. And I'm trying to keep the joy, front and center. And with the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, some of my PRs or my personal records in marathoning are in the rearview mirror. That's a tough one,
sure.
Right? So if my PR is going to be from Chicago in 2017, then how can I, run Boston in 2024 and be joyful? And the answer to that question is not easy, but I need to figure out a way to do that. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question about this race, I do have a goal. I have multiple goals, as everybody should have an A, B, and C goal. And my A goal would be to run a sub 320. Mm-hmm. I have to qualify. I have to run a sub 3:35, but with Boston, just qualifying isn't enough. You need to have a buffer. You need to run faster than your qualifying time. For instance, this year, there were more than 11,000 runners that qualified for the Boston Marathon, but won't be running it because they didn't run it fast enough and have a buffer that allowed them to actually get into the race.
I see.
Which is it's the sad reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to run not a 3:35. I really need to run at least a sub 3:30 or 3:25 and have a buffer of at least 5 minutes, hopefully more than 10 minutes, to be able to get into 2025 and qualify for 2025.
Mm-hmm. I got you. So performance is still front and center, and that's really impressive. I hope you achieve that goal. Certainly one of the things I'm looking forward to, in addition to the run, is to meeting you and getting you to sign my Boston Marathon Handbook.
Absolutely. I'm going to have, a lot of fun. That entire week is really special. I don't know when you get into town, but I would suggest trying to get there as early as you can that week.
I get in Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday's good. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're going to have an amazing time. That entire city just comes to life. People say Bostonians are, Puritan, or we're just, cold as a group of people. And Boston is at its best during Boston Marathon weekend. It just brings out the best in everybody in the city. So not only the expo is special, but around the expo, you're going to have pop-up stores on Newbury Street, and that entire Back Bay area is just, again, it's like this aura of magic that shows up in Boston year after year. So get there early. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to introducing the book to new runners that maybe haven't heard about it, having some events as well. So, sharing the book and talking about this great race, the Boston Marathon, with so many people. Can't wait.
I can't wait to see. Will you be at the expo or at and around the expo for book promotions?
So I will be at the expo. I have an event at Harvard on the 11th. I have a few things going on, some that have yet to be finalized, but I will be floating all over. And the funny little thing about that is, so, I didn't just write the book alone. There are many people that contributed to the book. And when I say people, I mean, some legends of the sport, like Dina Castor or Kara Goucher, Dathan Ritzenheim, Med Keflezgy, and I literally stumbled across them last year at the expo and during, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because, my network now might be a little larger, but back then was not large at all. And I wanted these people to contribute, but I had no connectivity to them.
Yeah.
But you could walk the streets. Dathan Ritzenheim is one example where he was just having a coffee all alone on Newbury Street. I saw him and introduced myself, and he said, absolutely, I will contribute to the book. And a week later, he sent me his quote for the book. So you'll just have these amazing human beings that you'd think you would never connect with. And Boston has a magical way of just making that happen.
I can't wait. It's certainly the way you and I got in touch through 1976 Boston Marathon winner Jack Fultz. I'm grateful that he connected us, and he drafted a great foreword to your book. And I look forward to seeing you in Boston. And thanks for joining us on the My First Rodeo podcast.
Mike, thank you so much. And you mentioned Jack. I just want to say one thing. Jack Fultz not only won in 1976 and the Run for the Hoses, which is just incredible, but Jack Fultz, more importantly, just has dedicated his life to the Boston Marathon. Mm-hmm. So when it came time to figure out who would write the foreword for the book, and after meeting Jack, I just knew right away that he was the perfect person. So that foreword that he wrote is really beautiful, and I want to appreciate. I want to just give Jack a shout out. Really thankful that he introduced me to you.
Yeah, likewise. See you soon.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
I think that was fascinating. Marc Pollina, the author of the Boston Marathon Handbook. Really a great read, obviously, for anybody who's about to run or go support somebody who's running the Boston Marathon, but really a great piece of Americana. So many metaphors. You heard allusions to some of those during our conversation. Just metaphors for life, metaphors for challenges, and just perseverance. So I highly recommend it for anybody who's really just dealing with life and life's experiences, and has an appreciation for running or athletic endeavors of that sort. Really neat guy. I loved the conversation about just where he draws his strength and how he balances things as a person that I'll say combines, although I'm not sure how well they combine, but I try to combine a lot of different brands, if you will, my comedy brand and my lawyer brand and my philanthropy and running brand, to say nothing of my parenting and sunning and, just being a human being brand. And I always admire people when I see folks that are accomplished and are doing a bunch of different things and doing them at a really high level. I'm not saying that's the only way to live. Sometimes I wish I was a little more focused in one area, but it's not how I was designed, and it's not how I thrive. And so, really like having a conversation with a fellow person with that type of personality and that type of diversity of interests who tries to pursue them all in a sort of obedient way to their nature. So check it out. Share this podcast with other people who you think might enjoy it. Please continue to listen and subscribe to the My First Rodeo podcast, and we'll catch you back here next time. Bye.